is Rhema's Breakfast Show, 7:43 a.m. on your Friday morning. Happy Friday. Oh, it's good to be with you this morning, and it's great to be joined today by Donald Goodhall. Now, he is a passionate leader at the intersection of art and faith. He has a rich history in worship leadership and now serves as director of Venn Foundation's Residential Fellowship. So, kia ora, welcome, Donald. It's great to have you here.
Oh, kia ora, Kat. Nice to be here.
So I am curious because the Venn Foundation is a big deal. So what led you personally to be a part of this in the first place?
Oh, there's a long story there, so I'm going to have to try and keep this really short. I was on staff at our church down in the Waikato for many, many years. Brief history in civil engineering way back, but you fall into these things. So I had the privilege of working with young people that evolved to more in the worship and art space. Beautiful times down there in Hamilton. But eventually, I felt the need to dive deeper and dig some wells for my own learning and growth. I didn't want to just keep repeating a year in the life of a youth worker or young adults pastor, And so I decided it was time. God was up to something. I decided, let's go study. And that led me to actually head off to Vancouver, to a place called Regent College.
Wow, what did you study there?
Yeah, so I did a master's in theology. And that provided just a way bigger vision of what God's up to. What does the gospel mean? What is scripture? How do I learn to pray? Things that, I thought I had a handle on, and I did in some ways. There was a real grace on those years down in the Waikato. But that just it blew out my mind as far as like, what is this thing that God's doing in the world? And just framing what it means to be human and our part within God's redemptive purposes. So
you did that, and then they approached you, or you approached them? How did that happen?
I ended up back in Hamilton, and people might say, oh, that's a bit sting, but I actually quite like Hamilton. It's about the people, right? And I was back at my church there, and that was fruitful. It was good. But you know how sometimes time's up?
Yes.
Yeah, so we got to that point where it's time's up. I decided with my wife and our kids, we needed to make a change. So we resigned into the great unknown of we don't know what we're going to do next. One of those faith steps.
Oh, 100%. I wouldn't be here if I hadn't taken one of those myself.
Yeah, and then after doing that, I realised that there was a conversation happening, which had actually started a number of months earlier when I met some of the people from Venn Foundation. I had no idea it was heading towards a role, but one thing led to another. The more we talked about it, the more we prayed, the more we discerned with our family and friends, we thought this is right.
Cool.
And headed to Auckland, which as a person who grew up in Hamilton, you never thought you'd do.
Oh, yeah. It's like come to Auckland and enjoy the traffic and the cost of living crisis kind of enhance. But let's not dwell on the negative. Let's look at the positive. So for people who haven't actually heard of the Venn Foundation, could you kind of touch on what it's all about?
Yeah, sure. Venn Foundation is an educational institution our work really is designed to introduce people and help people understand the depth of the Christian tradition, the depth of Scripture. There's beauty, there's riches, there's a grand vision stacked into the Scriptures, stacked into the tradition of the church. And, with our hope, our goal, our aim is to really get people immersed in that story, in the work of God in the world for the life of the world. And so that involves, much time in Scripture, just learning to be people who commune with God in prayer. So, some of the basics of prayer and Scripture, but they're not as, there's a lot there. There's a huge tradition that we don't want to be kind of glossing over. Let's dive into that and spend time kind of marinating in it.
Well, I think that's actually a really important point, because having been in the Pentecostal church environment and then now having kids that are in a Catholic school system where they attend Mass, you can see the complete contrast between different ways of walking out your faith journey.
Yeah.
And there's a lot to learn from both sides. And one of the things that I appreciate from being in Mass is just that depth and tradition that you probably don't actually know anything about if you haven't actually experienced it or learnt about it. So let's talk about, I have this very special book in front of me, and I know it's an amazing resource that actually helps with actually looking at the Bible and studying it and seeing it with new eyes. And the book's called The Insect and the Buffalo. And I understand it's actually one of your most well-known and best-sold resources at the Venn Foundation. So could you talk a little bit about The Insect and the Buffalo and what it's all about, this little book here?
Yeah, it's a cool little book. It's been around a little while, but it's been republished in recent years, and so it's not only the content that's good, it's now looking real nice. It's basically a short telling of the gospel of the biblical narrative, so the story of Scripture in a very bite-sized manner. So covering from Genesis through Revelation, making sense of kind of these movements of creation, fall, God's rescue as he chooses a people to represent him, how Christ sums that up in his own life, recapitulates it, so cross-resurrection, essentially, those huge things, through to the church and the Spirit, and then this beautiful vision of the new creation and our hope, really, of all things being made new. And it really, in paying attention to that story, we find ourselves, we find our place in that. So The Insect and the Buffalo is easy to read, I'd say really accessible, but challenging book, and it will certainly give you a new lens for reading Scripture.
Well, That's really exciting. So looking forward to actually diving into a copy of that myself. What's going to be happening at the summer conference?
Yeah, so the link here with the book that you've just talked about is the book does that telling of the story of Scripture, so beginning through in Genesis through Revelation. Summer conference is similar in some respects in that over the course of 1 week, we're going to do that movement from creation. Well, who is God is a huge key question at the front end. But creation, fall, Jesus, the church, the Spirit. What then does this mean for our lives in Aotearoa, New Zealand? And so we're really kind of mapping similar kind of a trajectory, an arc of storytelling. And we do that in really creative ways. We do that through some real solid theological teaching. And if that sounds boring to you, it really isn't. It's actually it's thoroughly enjoyable. There's a real key kind of delight and enjoyment around learning. Actually, as I was thinking about conference and kind of preparing for this conversation, Luke 24 came to mind, and this idea of walking down the road of Emmaus, pretty disheartened. These disciples are kind of walking away from Jerusalem, thinking, far out, we thought that was the Messiah, and look what's happened. And then as the stranger pulls up beside them, unpacks Scripture, their hearts burned. And that's for some people, I'd say for a lot of people, summer conference is the sense of my heart burned as I got to hear what the Scriptures have said, and they've helped me make sense of my life, and have pointed me to this one who then breaks bread and invites me in this radical act of hospitality to come and be with him.
Yeah, that's so cool.
Yeah, that's the experience really, as you pay attention to the story.
Yeah, and I think we're so far removed from the cultural context of when a lot of these stories and these things happened in time. So when you actually get a bit of understanding, the magnitude and the depth of some of the gestures and the things that happen actually hit you in such a different way. So it's really exciting. And I know that this summer conference is happening between January the 10th to the 17th. It's for people aged between 18 and 30. So if you know a young person who would benefit from this, or you fit in that category and you want to get along to have rich teaching, kōrero, be a part of this conversation, then you can go to venn.org.nz for more information. But Donald, thank you so much for spending some time with me on The Breakfast Show today.
Oh, it's been a joy. And thank you to Rhema for kind of supporting this work and partnering with us in making this happen.
Amazing. I hope you enjoyed that as much as we did.
Yeah, don't forget to like and subscribe and turn your notifications on so you don't miss the next video.
We'll see you in the next one.